A population is simply all of the individuals of one species in a particular area, and that area can be as big or as small as we want it. This image of starlings represents the population of starlings in this field ecosystem. That's one population. We're going to discuss population dynamics and look at the two major models that we use to understand population growth, the exponential model and the logistic model of population growth. Then we're going to look at how we describe and measure populations before we spend a little bit of time talking about one particularly unique population, which is the global human population. In order to get a handle on population dynamics, let's go back to our bird population and let's consider that as a particular unit. That bird population is going to have dynamics that are leading to an increase in the number of individuals in the population and a decrease. Increases in the number of individuals in the population come from birth and possibly from the immigration of individuals from other populations. Decreases are going to come from deaths and from emigration of individuals from that population. This is the exponential growth model, what a population would do if it could. If every member of a population successfully reproduces, over time the number of individuals will increase, but it will not be a linear increase. If the reproduction is a doubling, one individual will become 2, 2 will become 4, 4 will become 8, and so on and so on. That's exponential growth. You can mathematically model this on your own, and you will find out that if you continue exponential growth for a long enough time, in the case of a bacteria dividing every 20 minutes, after about a week, the population of that particular bacteria will occupy a mass equal to the entire mass of the Earth. That obviously is not what's going on in the real world, and that's because the exponential growth model is not taking into account limitations on population growth, which very much exist. And so that is our other model of population growth, the logistic growth model, which takes into account the limitations on population growth in a particular environment, what we call the carrying capacity, or the number of individuals of the population that can be sustained in a particular environment due to resource limitations. The logistic growth model is shown here for yeast up in the top graph, and shown down in the bottom for a population of seals that was recovering from a period of extensive hunting. Notice that in each case, there is a clear carrying capacity for these populations in their environments. The carrying capacity is symbolized as K, and it's important to understand that it is not a fixed value. Particularly in a non-laboratory setting, the carrying capacity for any population in the environment is going to fluctuate from year to year or season to season as the amount of resources change as well, which helps to explain the fluctuation around the average carrying capacity that you see in that seal graph, for instance. When thinking about the things that limit population growth, we talk about limiting factors. Limiting factors come in two different varieties. There are density-dependent limiting factors. These are factors that exert a bigger effect as the density of the population, as the number of individuals in that particular area increases. What you can see in this graph is a density-dependent limiting factor in a population of C. elegans worms. As the number of individuals in the population increases, each individual worm produces fewer and fewer eggs. This is due to the population exhausting the various resources in this environment. Space, food, an increase in the amount of waste that they're producing, all of these things are working together to have this density-dependent limiting effect. There are also density-independent limiting factors. These are factors that have a limiting effect on a population regardless of the number of individuals in the population. This graph is showing the relationship between the density of a population, which you can see on the y-axis, and the size of the organisms that we're talking about. The larger the organisms are, the lower the density of the population of that organism in the environment. It doesn't matter how many individuals of the population there are in the environment, it's simply a function of the size of the individuals themselves. That's a density-independent factor. Together, density-dependent and density-independent factors are contributing to the carrying capacity for a particular population in its environment. Now that we have an understanding of the dynamics of populations, we can talk about the other ways that we study populations. One of the main ways is looking at the distributions of the individuals in the population. And it's important to understand that distributions can be considered in terms of their patterns in space. So are individuals uniformly distributed in the environment, or are they randomly distributed or in clumped distributions, but they can also be expressed as patterns in time. So different populations, for instance, will have different patterns of survivorship, type 1, type 2, or type 3, which describe the number of individuals from any one year that survive from year to year going forward into time. Both patterns in space and patterns in time are useful for our own understandings of how the population is distributed, which of course will contribute to our understandings of the dynamics of the population more broadly. In terms of actually studying real-world populations, we do need to go out and collect data, and that can be done through direct sampling by going into an environment and counting the number of individuals in the population, or by using tools to estimate the number of individuals based on the number of individuals that we observe. But we can also use mathematical modeling to study real-world populations based on the data that we take from the environment and our larger theoretical understandings of population growth. All of these processes are used by population biologists when studying populations, which of course leads us to our next question of why should we even care to study populations? This graphic may help to explain that. We see 3 different maps of species richness for 3 different major types of vertebrate organisms in North America. We have an amphibian diversity map, a bird diversity map, and a mammal diversity map. If we want to know which areas of North America are most suited to the life strategies of amphibians or birds or mammals or humans or anything else, we're going to need to be able to understand how those populations are distributed. That's a major reason why we study populations. The interactions among members of a population and the interactions among populations with other populations are major networks by which the larger functionings of the biosphere are accomplished. So if we're interested in those functionings, and we should be if we like to breathe and eat and drink and live healthy lives, then we absolutely need to understand how the parts of those systems, the populations of individuals, are distributed and how they're interacting. Let's talk about the human population specifically. The human population, as you can see in this graph, is in a period of exponential growth. In the history of the species on the planet, it is a relatively recent development. 100 years ago, there were slightly more than 1 billion people on the planet, and in the last 100 years, that population has increased more than 7 times to the current population of more than 7 billion people on the planet. Depending upon when you watch this video, that number may very well be distant history. But we can also see that our population growth is beginning to slow down. You can see the declining rates of human population growth in the graph that's directly above me. And one thing to notice is that these rates are not uniformly decreasing across all of the major regions of the planet. Some human populations are decreasing their growth at a rate that's greater than other populations are. This is really important if we want to be able to plan for an Earth that's going to have 8 or 9 or even 10 billion people on it. At 7 billion people, we're already beginning to stress the ecosystems of the Earth in significant and, I would argue, concerning ways. Getting an understanding on how our population is going to continue to grow or not into the future is a crucial part of being able to handle the increased demands of the human population on the ecosystems of the planet. Thanks so much for watching our discussion on populations. Make sure you can do the following things here at the end. Make sure that you can explain how populations increase or decrease in size. Make sure that you can compare and contrast the exponential and logistic models of population growth. Make sure you can describe how and why populations are studied in biology. And finally, make sure that you can explain the general trends in the human population and why we should care about them. If you can do those things, you're doing great. If not, that's okay too. Take a moment here at the end and write down any questions that you have so that you can get the answers that you need. Thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.